The Norwegian author Jon Fosse won the Nobel Prize in Literature. That's huge, right? And totally deserved. This guy is an incredible author. But for many people, his win has a much deeper meaning. Fosse is the first Nobel Prize winner who writes in Nynorsk. And that's a big deal. Let me explain why this is so important. In Norway, we've got two ways of writing. Bokmål, which most people use, and Nynorsk, used by around 10% of the population, mainly in the west and south of Norway. Although both are taught in school, Nynorsk has been kind of slipping in popularity, stirring up some serious debates and even some heated moments. But why on earth do we have two written languages, and why does it stir up such strong emotions? Well, we've got to zip back to the 18th and 19th century to understand the whole story. Back in those days, Norway was under Danish rule, so while we kept chatting in our local dialects, the only language we used for writing was Danish. And after Denmark lost Norway, people started thinking, hey, maybe we should have our own written language, you know, to break away from Denmark and all that. But how do you go about creating a new written language? Well, you've got two options. You could tweak the existing one, in our case Danish, to make it align with how Norwegians speak. Or you could start from scratch, creating a new written language based on the spoken dialects. And this is basically how Nynorsk and Bokmål came into being. Just to make things clear, Bokmål and Nynorsk aren't what we speak. We all speak our own dialect, but when it comes to writing, we pick between these two. Alright, Bokmål is based on written Danish, but with a few twists. The grammar's been tweaked and there are slightly different words and altered spellings to make it look more Norwegian. For those who already knew Danish, picking up Bokmål was really not that difficult. However, it was not the complete break from Danish some people were hoping for. Plus, it differs quite a bit from the way some folks actually speak. And this is where this guy becomes a key player. He spent years traveling across Norway, collecting samples and data from almost all Norwegian dialects. His mission was to find a common pattern in the diverse ways Norwegians speak. And this was a tough task, considering how the dialects can vary, with some even sounding like they are completely different languages. But he didn't just stop there. Over the years, he continued his travels, adding even more dialects to his research. His goal was to create a language that was as close as possible to as many dialects as possible, without reverting back to Old Norse. So he focused on the oldest shared features of these dialects, leaving out the dialects spoken in the bigger cities, as they were already highly influenced by languages like German or Danish. Aasen compiled his findings into a dictionary and a grammar book, and initially he called his language Landsmål, which was eventually renamed Nynorsk. In 1885, a significant decision was made. The Norwegian government passed a law recognizing Nynorsk as equal to that what eventually became known as Bokmål. This meant that as we approached the 20th century, Norway had two officially recognized and equally correct ways of writing. And now it was up to the people to choose which one they preferred. So how do you handle this kind of mix-up? Start with schools and churches. The first schools that introduced Nynorsk to the program were some schools in villages of western and southern Norway. Soon more schools followed, and Nynorsk eventually became the main writing standard in these regions. However, in the bigger cities and other parts of the country, people stuck with Bokmål, and that's pretty much how it is today. And when you think about it, it really makes sense. In places where Nynorsk mirrors the local dialect, that's what people tend to write. But in other areas like Eastern Norway, where the spoken language aligns more closely with Bokmål, that's the natural choice for writing. But still, understanding each other is crucial, and that's where schools come in. At schools, both forms are taught. The main one is used for most of the schooling, while the other one is taught as a secondary subject. And theoretically, this ensures that everybody can communicate effectively, no matter what form they prefer. Long story short, some Norwegians write in Nynorsk while the majority uses Bokmål. And to cater to everyone, all media outlets are required to publish in both forms. For example, in 2022, Nynorsk accounted for about 25% of all media content. Additionally, official documents must be available in both languages, and depending on where you live, your official correspondence will be in either Nynorsk or Bokmål. This is typically decided by your local municipality, but you're free to request your documents in the other form if you prefer. This dual language policy is protected by law and in theory should work smoothly. However, it often falls short, particularly for Nynorsk users. Take this guy who battled with the local police for over 35 years to get his tickets in Nynorsk. For him, it's about principle and adherence to the law. So there is a noticeable gap in the availability of Nynorsk, especially for official resources. Well, you could argue that Bokmål is more widely used and that it should naturally take precedence over Nynorsk, the minority language. Therefore, one might suggest simplifying matters by standardizing the written language to a single form, like we have with High German. If we base our decision on the number of users, Bokmål might seem like the logical choice, but this would alienate a significant number of people whose dialects bear little resemblance to Bokmål, forcing them to adopt a writing style that diverges sharply from the way they speak. Besides, language is intrinsically linked to our identity, regardless of whether it's written or spoken. And for those who have been using Nynorsk for generations, it's a vital part of the heritage, not something that can be replaced by a new standard. Similarly, imposing Nynorsk as the sole standard isn't feasible either, as it is utilized by far fewer people. Plus, it would be really unfair for those who have been accustomed to Bokmål for over 2 centuries, so I believe it's unlikely for either Nynorsk or Bokmål to become the sole standard of written Norwegian. And honestly, I don't think there is a need for just one. Bokmål and Nynorsk aren't drastically different, they are still variations of the same language. For most Norwegians who are used to a range of dialects, understanding both forms isn't a big problem. Yes, there are some vocabulary and grammatical differences, but it's nothing too overwhelming. As someone who uses Bokmål, I don't have any trouble reading Nynorsk, but I believe I wouldn't be able to write proper Nynorsk without any practice. Nynorsk users, on the other hand, often fluently navigate both forms, largely due to their extensive exposure to Bokmål. Realistically, we could all just accept having 2 written forms of Norwegian and get along fine, but let's face it, people aren't always objective. And for some, especially among Bokmål users, learning Nynorsk can stir up pretty strong feelings. Their objections are often the same. Nynorsk isn't relevant enough, and learning it is seen as a waste of time. And this isn't a new issue. The struggle between Bokmål and Nynorsk has been around as long as the languages themselves. Usually it's the Bokmål folks who aren't keen on being forced to learn, and in particular take exams in Nynorsk, which I can totally understand. The disdain for Nynorsk often gets a boost from political circles. But luckily, this kind of harassment doesn't occur very often, because Nynorsk is by no means inferior and there is a wealth of beautiful literature written in it. It just needed a spotlight, a moment to shine and to remind everyone of its value. And that's exactly what happened when Jon Fosse was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. I hope this might spark a new wave of interest in Nynorsk, encouraging people to explore and be more open to it. Being able to choose between different written languages is truly remarkable. It gives us the freedom to express ourselves in a way that feels most authentic, ensuring that every part of our beautiful language not only survives but continues to thrive and tell our stories.